Okay, so just to recap, you've probably watched the phonetics lesson where I talk about the four P's. I've talked about semantics and how there's a reference problem, which is solved through Nibs and Broca's and Wernicke's aphasia. And now we're going to go more into syntax and grammar. And it is a lot. It is very much a lot. So I broke it into two parts. This is probably part two, if there is even an order. And yeah, we're going to learn about the main fights in syntax and how that developed and blah, blah, blah. So, just in a review before we start, we're going to talk about Skinner, who we all know and love, and he was in behavioralism, and he was like maybe a lesson or two ago, not a lecture or two, but like a unit or two ago. And we're going to learn about this new guy Chomsky that's like, no, you're wrong. We're going to learn about chimpanzee studies and if they can master language. Can they speak English? Do we know? We're also going to talk about feral children and what that can teach us about language. And then I broke down a lot of Knowles's points from lecture into boss fights. That's just how I framed it. You can do it however the hell you want. But let's get started. Okay, so we all know B.F. Skinner. He was one of the behavioralists. He coined operant conditioning. He had like a little box that he put his daughter in and tried to like do a whole bunch of behavioral stuff. And he made those schedules of reinforcement that you guys had to memorize. You remember that? You should for the final. Please do. But anyways, he's pretty well established, and B.F. Skinner was like, yo, okay, language is learned. Like, we reinforce it, we condition it, and that's how babies like learn language. And then Noam Chomsky in like the 1940s or 60s or something is like, nah, bruh, you are wrong, and posts the most scathing, absolutely roasting the shit out of him kind of report, essentially just saying, no, I think that language is innate. I think that like we are born with an inherent ability to speak language. And we will talk about who's right or wrong. Okay, so essentially reinstating the sides. You should know that B.F. Skinner is kind of on the nurture side of things, and Chomsky's on the nature side of things. It kind of shows like this shift from behavioralism to more like psycholinguistics and that kind of shit, developmental psych. And so we have these two sides. It's really freaking funny. Skinner has this doctoral student in his lab that's like, I'm gonna make my father proud. I'm gonna go after Chomsky and prove once and for all like language is not innate, and I'm gonna do this by teaching even a monkey language, and I'm just gonna do it through reinforcement and conditioning, like that'll show him. And so this doctoral student starts chimpanzee studies, and the main chimpanzee he calls Nim Chimpsky. He's gonna prove Noam Chomsky wrong with a chimpanzee called Nim Chimpsky, and I think this is like the most absurd thing ever. I think it's crazy, and I'm like so upset that he died of a heart attack because I wanted to meet him. But yeah, he was wild. And essentially what happened is that they taught this monkey language, and the monkey doesn't have the vocal cords, okay, to like speak or anything, but they teach the monkey ASL by like moving the little monkey hands and making little monkey signals and like rewarding the monkey whenever the monkey did the right thing. It was crazy. It was absolutely wild. Like, the monkey learned like over 100 words. And so it kind of proved Noam Chomsky wrong in the way that they could teach semantics. But if you look at this, like, this is not English, I guess. Like, you could say that like it's kind of, but they only were able to obtain like the semantic meaning of words. They weren't able to obtain like that more complex syntax and grammar. Like, if you look at these, the way that they like analyze these words is they do it by mean length of utterances, which is basically how many words or like morphemes are in a sentence. It only gets up to like 4 or 5, and like compare that to like a full-blown human. Like, even a 2-year-old is using, like, more complex grammar than that. So it's kind of like a weird comparison. It's like, why are you comparing, like, chimps to humans, bro. Like, obviously they're not going to have the same like abilities. Also, this is important enough that I'm literally splicing it in because I forgot about it, but then I went back and looked at my notes and saw this. So they cannot learn words as quickly as infants, like human infants can. For example, you see like with babies, they have this huge vocabulary explosion where they're like suddenly learning 1 billion words per minute. Yeah, monkeys don't have that. They don't have like that specialized Broca's Wernicke's area that we do, so it's not really a fair comparison. We have like crazy ass brains. They don't have that, which is kind of, yeah, why they can't learn words as quickly. We saw that with babies, it takes one exposure and they'll figure it out on their own little head. Like, they'll use nibs, they'll use novelty referencing, intentionality, category assumption, the basic level of category assumption, and social referencing. Check me on that. But yeah, they use that and then they instantly know the word. With chimpanzees, you got to train them like 1 billion times for that to happen. So remember that. He kind of proves himself wrong, essentially. He kind of proves his own dad wrong. He's like, yeah, Skinner, sorry, my bad. Like, it's not just conditioning, because obviously, like, there's something else going on. Like, he can't learn grammar, and it even went so far for Chomsky to say that, hey, maybe we have something inherently in our brains that prepares us to learn grammar, prepares us to learn language. Maybe it's just us humans and we were supposed to do this. Yeah, very destiny focused. I was kind of bummed out by this experiment because that Chimsky, was supposed to teach the other chimps sign language, and he was supposed to be an interpreter, which would have been so cool. I've always wanted to talk to animals, but you know, L on their part. So yeah, I thought that was kind of a mid-experiment overall because they were comparing chimpanzees to monkeys. Like, if it were up to me and I were a developmental psychologist and I were trying to like see if language is something we're inherently born with or not, of course I would just run a classic experiment with like a control group and an experimental group, and I would have like the main baby raised in a typical way around language and blah 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 blah. And then I would have the other baby, like, raised, like, maybe, like, isolated from all words and make sure that they don't even see gestures, because that could be, like, a form of sign language, you know. We already saw that sign languaging baby in class, so there's that possibility. But obviously, I can't do that, and pause and tell me why. You're like so right. You're so right. Oh my gosh, it's ethics. It's the main reason why people do correlational studies rather than experimental studies. Call back to like one of the first lectures we ever had, like doing experiments on depressed people or people with cancer. You know, you can't do that. That's why you're in correlational studies. But that kind of brings into question, like, what if I just so happened upon a child that has been severely neglected by their parents for a long period of time? Would developmental psychologists be able to do experiments on that? Okay, so this actually happens in the world. This is kind of depressing, so trigger warning real quick. Essentially, there was this child that was suddenly found. That's why she's called Jeannie, you know, at 13 years old. And she, for the majority of her life, had been, like, basically neglected by her parents. Like, the only human interaction she had was when her, like, father would go into the room, unstrap her from her crib, and then restrap her to a toilet. And then do that, like, every day. And like she was just like severely malnourished. It's a horrifying story. Go read about it on Wikipedia. But it was essentially like what I was proposing in the experiment, which I would never do, by the way. I was just proposing that as a transition to this. But yeah, it really shows us what happens. Look at this video.
You want to see your father? Father's not living. You remember what it was like when you lived at home? What were you sitting on when you ate the cereal?
In the pot.
In the potty chair.
Potty chair.
Where did you stay when you lived at home? Where did you live? Where did you sleep?
Pot.
You slept in the potty chair?
Potty chair.
Okay, and so what this proved is that maybe there is a language acquisition device in our brains, but that thing is on a deadline, you know? By the time you reach puberty, you better have trained that thing up, because after it is very, very hard to learn language, if not impossible, specifically for grammar. And it's different for people who have already obtained like a first language. That's different, but in Jeannie's case, she never really fully grasped grammar, which was so interesting. She was able to grasp words, but not grammar. Okay, so what does that mean for each side, you know? Like, how does that support each argument? We still got 3 fights to go. I organized like the rest of the points in Knowles' class into like 3 fights, mainly because I feel like that's the easiest way to understand it. And so people who are on the behavioralist side were like, they learn syntax because of instruction. You go to school, you learn about grammar, and that's how you obtain an understanding of it. And Chomsky was like, bro, what are you talking about? Some cultures don't even like talk to their kids, don't put them through school like that, like in such a like formal, professional, whatever way, and like the kid still turns out fine, like the kid can still speak, so what do you want about? Also, have you ever seen a kid in class? Like that kid hates being in class, and like even if you give them direct instruction, like consciously, they don't like learning consciously. So it must be that grammar is learned on some kind of subconscious level. Let's see, what's next? Then Skinner was like, okay, maybe it's not like instruction in a formal sense. What if they're just imitating their parents, you know? Like, they imitate their parents on everything. It's like a social aspect of learning, you know? Like, and Chomsky was like, bro, what are you talking about? Sometimes kids say the craziest stuff, and we've never said that to them before. Like, for example, like, I finded Renee. They overgeneralize these rules of grammar, and they sound so silly goofy, but we're used to them doing that. They've been doing that forever. So how is it that they're just learning through imitation, you know? And also that implies that they've just memorized, like, 1 billion sentences on this earth, and they're just repeating them. Like, that's not possible. I can't do that as an adult. Why do you think that babies can do that or children can do that, you know? And then they went even further, okay? Nativists were like, nah, bro, it's not imitation, and let's prove it through an experiment. Like, they had a bunch of children come together, and they were like, this little bird is a wug. Okay. And then the children were like, all right. And then they asked them, okay, now there's two of them. What are these called? And they were like, oh, it's wugs, you know? And so that showed that they were using grammatical rules and not, like, imitating anyone else, because wugs don't exist, in case you're wondering. Like, they could have never heard that word before. And so, yeah, got proven wrong. They also did it with a man who was Rickin', like Rick and Mortying. He ricked. Oh, he ricked, yeah, past tense, okay, cool. Also, children have been seen making their own grammatical structures. Like, look at this, for example.
Poto and Kabengo were a pair of identical twins who were so neglected during their childhood that they ended up developing their own language. Because they encountered a little bit of English and German from their mother and grandmother, but they weren't talked to enough to actually acquire those languages, they ended up combining them into a sort of Creole. For example, the sentence Pinit puta traletungai meant finished, potato salad hungry, and Liba Kabingot eat meant dear Kabengo eat. You can see how the language has its own unique grammar and word formation rules, which makes it an extreme form of cryptophagia, a phenomenon where twins develop a language only they can understand.
Yeah. Read this if you like words. And then the last one was like, okay, if it's not just like instruction, if it's not imitation, it's just that they get reinforced. Like, whenever they say something correctly, they get a good response. Or if they say something incorrectly, their parents are going to be like, nah, bro, like, you need to correct that. That's not right. Or they get it socially, you know. And then Chomsky was like, okay, let me prove you wrong. And he showed that parents are really, really, really bad teachers. And he showed that, like, parents actually prefer to teach words, and they don't focus that much about grammar. I don't think anybody really consciously knows grammar, okay? Like, nobody really knows the rules of grammar. You can look at something and know that it's kind of wrong. Peek to the previous videos. But, like, nobody's consciously thinking about it that hard, okay? So, like, actually, like, no, they're wrong. And so those were the 3 fights. And, yeah, Chomsky won. Rip Skinner. Sorry about that, Skinner. So, recapping what I just said, what was the big fight on? Name the 2 main people. Okay, and what sides were they on? Who was nature? Who was nurture? Okay. What were the 3 main arguments in the fight, and who won using what points? Okay. What did Genie tell us about language? And what did chimpanzees tell us about language? Can you answer these questions? If you can't, then you were not paying attention, which is pretty in this day and age. Kind of an L on your part, but yeah, rewatch it. Do you need me to, like, explain it again? Essentially, B.F. Skinner was the behavioralist we already learned about. He said that language was just reinforced and taught to us, and conditioned into us. And then Chomsky was like, nah, I believe that there's an innate part of us that was meant to learn language. And, like, we have a language acquisition device in our brain that is ready to learn language and grammar. And then they had, like, 3 boss fights where, like, the behavioralist side was like, you know, it's just taught through instruction, it's just taught through imitation, it's just taught through reinforcement. And then the nativist side was like, nah, fam, like, it's more instinctual. People learn children learn unconsciously. They don't like conscious instruction. Sometimes they don't even get that reinforcement from their parents, or they get the wrong kind of reinforcement, you know. And they overgeneralize a lot, which shows that they're not just memorizing whatever their parent says. Like, they're thinking about it, they're creating their own, like, internal rules. But yeah, and then the chimpanzee studies basically showed that like, chimps could learn semantic words but not grammar, and that might just be an us thing. And then Genie showed that we have, like, a sensitive period to learn language. Like, learning grammar is on a deadline. Once you hit puberty and you haven't, like, gotten grammar or gotten a good grasp of it, or just been, like, completely deprived of language, it's really hard to learn after that. That's more about neuroplasticity, which is kind of cool. But yeah, hope you enjoyed.